right now, somewhere in the world, there's this automated AI script trying to use a toddler's social security number to basically steal part of a $35 billion shadow economy.
Yeah.
It's building a fake identity, generating a fabricated credit history, and just preparing to drain a massive line of credit.
Right.
And the crazy thing is, the only thing standing between that algorithm and a huge payout might actually be that highly annoying, like 40-minute phone queue you had to sit in yesterday just to unlock your bank account.
I mean, it is a completely jarring reality to confront, especially because, you know, our entire modern conditioning basically tells us that waiting on hold or, I don't know, filling out forms is just this massive failure of corporate design.
Exactly.
We just expect the one-click checkout everywhere now.
We really do. And, you know, looking through the research dossier for a deep dive today, it brought up this lived experience that I think perfectly captures this tension.
Yeah.
Because I had this exact scenario happen maybe a few months ago.
Oh.
Yeah. So I walked into a physical bank branch to complete what I thought was an incredibly basic administrative request. I mean, I expected to be in and out in 5 minutes, tops.
Sure.
Instead, I hit an absolute wall of bureaucracy. I was handed physical paper forms. I was asked for 2 distinct pieces of identification. And then the real kicker was I had to sit in a chair and literally wait for a branch manager to walk over and physically countersign this piece of paper.
Right, a piece of paper that in any logical world should have been a digital checkbox on an app like 5 years ago.
Exactly. And if you're anything like me, your physiological response sitting in that chair is just a rising tide of cortisol. I was fuming. My immediate thought was, you know, this is a dinosaur institution.
They're just thinking their technology is entirely legacy.
Totally. I thought the customer experience is abysmal. They have absolute zero respect for my time. I just categorized the whole multi-step, paper-heavy process as a total bug in their system.
But, you know, the dossier we are unpacking for you today suggests this really radical reframing of that exact moment. Because what if you were entirely wrong about what you were experiencing?
Which is wild to think about.
It is. What if that highly annoying waiting period, you know, that physical signature, what if that wasn't a bug at all? What if that friction was actually the product you were buying?
And I'll be honest, the moment I read that in the notes, it stopped me in my tracks. Because calling a frustrating delay a product just feels like corporate gaslighting, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But when you actually start to map out the institutional function of a financial intermediary, the picture completely flips. Because a bank's primary job, historically, fundamentally, isn't speed.
Right, it's the protection of assets.
Yes.
Yes.
It's ensuring regulatory compliance, preventing fraud, and, you know, verifying identity in an ecosystem that is just teeming with bad actors.
And when you make that function visible, suddenly that manager's signature transforms from this pointless delay into a permanent governance record.
Exactly. The ID check stops being a hassle, and it literally becomes a load-bearing wall, keeping a synthetic fraudster out of your life savings.
Which is the exact puzzle we are trying to solve on this deep dive today. So for everyone listening, our central question for this investigation is this. Have modern organizations become exceptionally good at measuring the costs of friction while becoming comparatively poor at recognizing, classifying, and valuing the functions that friction actually performs?
And before we get into the actual mechanics of how organizations make these decisions, I really want to establish some firm guardrails for you, because we are going to explore a massive stack of economic theory, behavioral psychology, systems engineering today. But this is not an apology for terrible banking.
No, definitely not.
We are not critiquing the concept of a good customer experience, and we are certainly not suggesting that all friction is secretly good for you.
Right.
Nobody derives value from a broken website interface.
Right. A bad app is just a bad app.
Yeah. What we are exploring here is decision-making. We're investigating how institutions decide what obstacles to eliminate, which ones to redesign, and which ones are actually the hidden core of the value they provide.
And to understand how we sort of lost the ability to value friction, we really have to look backward. We have to understand how frictionlessness became the ultimate corporate obsession, you know, this kind of unassailable gospel in modern business.
Right, and the dossier points us to this seminal book that really codified this shift. It's called The Effortless Experience by Matthew Dixon, Karen Freeman, and Nicholas Toman. And this research completely upended the prevailing wisdom of customer service.
Because if you look at the 90s and 2000s, the absolute gold standard for corporate strategy was delighting the customer.
Delighting the customer was everywhere. You couldn't just solve a problem. You had to go above and beyond, surprise them, create a magical moment.
And the authors actually highlight this really famous, maybe the most extreme example of this philosophy in action, which is the legendary story of Joshi the giraffe at the Ritz-Carlton.
I love this story so much.
It's so good. So a family is vacationing in Florida. They pack up to leave, and they accidentally leave behind their young son's favorite stuffed animal, Joshi.
And the kid is naturally melting down.
Right. So the parents do what parents do.
They lie.
They lie. They tell the kid, Joshi isn't lost. He just decided to stay at the hotel for an extended vacation.
Which buys them a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But they immediately call the hotel in an absolute panic, just hoping housekeeping didn't throw it in the trash.
And not only did housekeeping find Joshi, but the Ritz-Carlton staff, knowing the parents' white lie, they decided to really lean into it.
Oh, they went all in.
They didn't just toss the giraffe in a padded envelope. The loss prevention team literally took Joshi on a tour of the resort.
Yeah, they photographed this stuffed giraffe lounging in a pool chair with little sunglasses, getting a spa treatment with cucumbers on its eyes.
Driving a golf cart, hanging out with the hotel parrot.
It's amazing.
They compiled a physical photo album of this vacation, put it in a box with Joshi, and overnighted it to the family.
It's such a brilliant, heartwarming story. And of course, it went absolutely viral in business circles.
Yeah.
Like every CEO, every VP of operations read that story and said, we need to operationalize that.
Right. They said we need our call center reps and our frontline staff delivering Joshi the giraffe moments every single day.
But Dixon, Freeman, and Toman actually went and looked at the data. They analyzed tens of thousands of customer service interactions across all these different industries. And their findings essentially took a sledgehammer to that entire delight paradigm.
Yeah, because the data revealed a massive disconnect between corporate intention and actual human psychology. They found that going above and beyond, delighting a customer, statistically does not build measurable loyalty.
I found this part of the research genuinely shocking. I mean, you would think someone who got a customized photo album of a stuffed animal would be a customer for life, compared to someone who just got their basic problem solved.
You would think so. But at scale, the loyalty of a customer whose expectations were massively exceeded was basically indistinguishable from the loyalty of a customer whose expectations were simply met.
Wow.
The real insight, the actionable data, was on the negative side of the spectrum. What actually drives disloyalty, what makes a customer abandon a company entirely, is effort.
Right. So when my home internet goes down and my router is just flashing red, I don't want the telecom provider to delight me.
You don't want a personalized poem about your Wi-Fi.
Exactly, no. I want the internet back on without having to navigate a 12-level automated phone tree and without having to repeat my account number to 3 separate human beings.
Precisely. Customers just want you to reduce their effort. And this revelation birthed a totally new metric that swept through boardrooms globally to join things like Net Promoter Score. It was called the Customer Effort Score, or CES.
And the philosophy just became incredibly simple. Make it easy. If you reduce effort, you reduce disloyalty. Eliminate friction at all costs.
Which is a compelling pitch.
And we have to give credit where it's due, right? This philosophy, broadly applied, has made our day-to-day lives infinitely better. The fact that we can cancel a subscription with a button on our phone instead of mailing a certified letter, or troubleshoot a device through a really clean app interface, that's a direct result of this war on effort.
Oh, absolutely.
So if making things easier objectively saves everyone time and increases baseline satisfaction, where does this philosophy actually break down? Because logically, eliminating waste just seems foolproof.
Well, the flaw isn't in the concept of reducing effort itself. The fatal flaw, the reason this led to such massive systemic vulnerabilities, is what researchers call a domain error. You have to think about the specific types of interactions that the customer effort score was originally designed to measure.
Right. It was designed for service recovery, meaning the customer is contacting you because something in the normal flow has already broken.
Exactly. A billing error, a missed delivery, a malfunctioning device. In the domain of service recovery, friction is just pure, unadulterated waste. The catastrophic mistake occurred when executives took this framework, this absolute crusade against any form of customer effort, and just copy-pasted it across every single interaction in the entire business.
So they took a diagnostic tool meant for fixing a broken router, and they applied it to account creation, identity verification, multi-thousand-dollar money transfers.
Yeah, they applied a metric designed for a domain where difficulty is inherently a bug to domains where difficulty might actually serve a vital protective function.
But if the data clearly shows that CES is just a diagnostic tool for service recovery, how on earth did it become the North Star for the entirety of corporate strategy? You have brilliant executives, highly paid consultants, risk managers. How did they all collectively agree to strip away protective friction just to make a number go up?
Well, to understand that, we really have to look at the gravitational pull of metrics themselves. The dossier incorporates the work of economic historian Jerry Z. Muller, specifically his book, The Tyranny of Metrics. And Muller argues that organizations naturally, almost inevitably, optimize whatever they can easily measure.
We replace nuanced, contextual human judgment with these standardized numerical targets because the numbers feel unarguable, right? They feel objective.
Exactly. If an engineer comes in and says, I think our identity verification process is making users feel slightly fatigued.
That's subjective.
Right, that is a highly subjective observation. It's really hard to build a quarterly bonus structure around a feeling. But if you say, our time to onboard metric is currently 4.2 minutes, and our Q3 target is 3.5 minutes, well, suddenly you have a hard target. You have something you can actively manage.
Which immediately triggers two foundational concepts in social science the dossier highlights, which are Goodhart's law and Campbell's law. I think we should dig into how these actually operate mechanically, starting with Goodhart's law, which is famously summarized as, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
It is just a brilliant distillation of goal displacement. Let's say a government wants to improve the abstract concept of educational quality. You can't easily measure that, so you use standardized test scores as a proxy.
Which makes sense at first.
Initially, yeah, it's a decent proxy. But the moment you make those scores the actual target, the moment you tie school funding or teacher salaries to hitting a specific number on that test, the system completely warps. Teachers rationally respond to the incentive by teaching to the test. They cut art, they cut recess, they drill rote memorization.
So the test scores go up, the metric looks absolutely fantastic on a dashboard, but the actual underlying objective, which was a well-rounded education, just collapses.
Exactly.
The measure decoupled from the reality it was supposed to represent.
And then you have Campbell's law, which is really the darker, more aggressive cousin to this phenomenon. It states that the more any quantitative social indicator is used for high-stakes decision-making, the more subject it will be to corruption pressures.
Meaning people will cheat.
Right. When jobs are on the line, people will actively game the system to manipulate the metric, even if it completely destroys the institution.
Which brings us to, arguably, the canonical business failure of the 21st century regarding metrics, which is the Wells Fargo cross-selling scandal. It is the perfect, truly terrifying illustration of Muller's thesis.
Let's break down the mechanics of what actually happened there, because Wells Fargo had a perfectly rational, traditional banking strategy. They just wanted to deepen their relationship with their existing customers. This is called cross-selling.
Right. The logic is totally sound. If a customer has a checking account, you obviously also want them to hold their mortgage, their credit card, and their savings account with you. Because the more products they have, the higher the switching costs, and the more profitable they are as a customer.
But leadership didn't just measure this strategy. They turned it into a high-stakes, uncompromising target. They instituted the GR8 campaign, spelled GR8, meaning the stated goal was for every single customer to hold 8 distinct financial products.
Which is a huge number.
It is, and they aggressively tied employee compensation, branch rankings, and literally daily job security to hitting these cross-sell quotas.
So you have frontline employees making relatively low wages, being threatened with termination if they don't convince a customer who just came in to cash a check to suddenly open 3 new credit cards.
Yeah.
So the mechanics of goal displacement took over completely. The employees obviously couldn't magically generate genuine demand for 8 products, so they manipulated the metric.
They started opening millions of unauthorized accounts in their customers' names.
Millions.
Yes. They moved small amounts of money from real accounts to fund fake accounts just to hit the daily dashboard targets. From the executive suite, if you are looking only at the metric, the strategy seemed to be an unprecedented success.
Until the illusion finally shattered, resulting in what? Billions in regulatory fines and just devastating reputational damage. But here is where I want to push back a little bit, or at least introduce a counter perspective from the sources. Because Michael Schrage, writing in the Harvard Business Review, vehemently defends the concept of metrics. He argues that blaming the metric for the Wells Fargo disaster is like blaming a speedometer for drunk driving.
Oh, that's a fantastic analogy because it forces us to look at the driver, not the dashboard.
Exactly. The speedometer's only job is to tell you that you are going 90 miles an hour. If you choose to ignore the icy road conditions, the fact that your tires are totally bald and you wrap your car around a tree, you don't sue the speedometer company.
Right.
The metric is agnostic. The failure is entirely in how leadership wields the tool. It's the toxic combination of extreme pressure and a complete lack of secondary checks.
And Schrage pushes this even further, noting that what an organization explicitly chooses not to measure reveals its true priorities. Yeah. Wells Fargo measured the sheer volume of new accounts with microscopic precision. But they chose not to measure customer consent. They chose not to measure employee burnout. They chose not to measure the actual utilization of those new accounts.
Which perfectly tees up one of the most vital concepts in our dossier: structural measurement asymmetry. This explains the actual mechanical physics of why large organizations are so aggressively biased toward stripping away friction, particularly in digital environments.
To visualize this asymmetry, imagine the internal operational dynamics of, say, a major e-commerce platform or a digital bank. Let's say you have a specific moment of friction, like a two-factor authentication prompt right before a large transfer or a high-value purchase.
Okay, so the user has to wait for a text message, read a 6-digit code, and type it in.
Exactly. A standard toll booth on the digital highway.
Yeah.
Now imagine the product team or the growth department analyzing that exact step. What do they see on their dashboard?
They see an incredibly clear, highly visible, quantifiable cost. They can see that exactly 4.2% of users abandon their session at that specific screen. They know the average cart value. Therefore, they can calculate the exact dollar amount of revenue that this friction is destroying every single day.
It is a hard bleeding number. It's a metric that actively hurts their quarterly bonuses. But then you have the fraud and security department looking at that exact same two-factor authentication step. What do they see?
They see massive value. They see protection.
But, and this is the crux of the entire deep dive, their metric is an invisible counterfactual.
Yeah.
They're trying to measure a fraudulent transaction that never actually happened.
Because the bad actor bought stolen credentials on the dark web, tried to log in, but couldn't bypass the text message prompt, so they just gave up.
Precisely. You cannot easily count an event that didn't occur. The speedometer only measures speed. It does not measure the fatal accident you avoided because you drove carefully.
That is such a crucial point. The cost of the friction is immediate, it's hypovisible, and it's directly tied to revenue. The benefit of the friction is totally abstract, preventative, and largely theoretical until a breach actually happens.
And because organizations naturally optimize what they can clearly measure, they are structurally biased toward siding with the product team and just removing the protective friction entirely.
Okay, so we've established that human psychology craves effortlessness, metrics naturally drift toward measuring speed over security, and organizations have a structural bias to delete friction. But we also established early on that we aren't defending terrible customer experiences.
Right.
So how do we actually differentiate? How does a manager look at an obstacle and know if it's a load-bearing wall or just a pile of bureaucratic garbage? Because we need some kind of taxonomy of friction.
To establish the baseline of that taxonomy, the dossier points us to the work of legal scholar Cass Sunstein, specifically his book Sludge. If you are familiar with behavioral economics, you know the concept of a nudge. A small design tweak that makes it easier for people to make good choices, like automatically enrolling employees in a retirement plan.
And sludge is sort of the dark, heavy mirror image of the nudge.
Exactly. Sunstein defines sludge as excessive, unjustified administrative burdens that cost time, create severe psychological stress, and often actively deprive people of benefits they are legally entitled to.
I mean, we've all experienced this. It's the 40-page, densely worded physical form you have to fill out to access a basic medical benefit. Or it's the requirement to physically mail a notarized letter to a P.O. box just to cancel a $20 gym membership.
And Sunstein makes a really critical point about the demographics of sludge. It is not distributed equally. Sludge has massive distributional consequences.
How so?
It disproportionately punishes vulnerable populations, people who are time poor, who work hourly wage jobs and can't spend 3 hours on hold on a Tuesday afternoon, or who don't have accountants and lawyers to navigate the bureaucracy on their behalf.
So let's draw a hard line here for everyone listening. This is our baseline. Sludge is objectively bad. Administrative friction that exists merely because of institutional inertia, or worse, intentional obfuscation, that just must be eliminated.
Yes, absolutely.
But the dossier proposes a framework called the friction function matrix, and it argues that if you look closely at the mechanics of systems, not all friction is sludge. Often, the obstacle is performing a highly specific task.
So let's walk through the matrix. The first category, as we just discussed, is administrative friction, which is largely sludge. But the second category is where things get really interesting, and that is compliance and accountability friction.
Let's use the concept of maker-checker controls in a corporate treasury department. If a junior analyst wants to wire $5 million to a vendor, the system physically prevents them from executing the trade alone.
Right, they draft the wire, they are the maker.
But the money doesn't actually move until a senior manager logs in, reviews the details, and approves it. They are the checker.
Now, to an efficiency consultant, that looks like a bottleneck. It doubles the time required to move money. But that friction isn't just about preventing a fat finger typo. The friction creates an indelible governance record.
Wow, yeah.
If it turns out that vendor was actually a shell company, the maker-checker friction ensures there is an audit trail. The friction creates the legal accountability. The exact same logic applies to a physical signature on a mortgage document.
Which leads to the third category, which I find fascinating. Signaling friction. These are procedural obstacles whose primary economic function isn't necessarily technical security, but rather communicating institutional seriousness.
The dossier uses the example of a highly formal, multi-step intake process at an elite corporate law firm. I mean, they could probably have you fill out a web form in 3 minutes.
Easily, yeah.
Instead, they require multiple consultations, exhaustive conflict of interest checks, formal documentation. The friction itself signals to the client, we are exhaustive, we are careful, and we take your legal exposure incredibly seriously. It builds trust through the visible expenditure of effort.
I see the logic, but I really have to challenge that.
Okay, go for it.
Because if I'm an executive at a massive legacy bank with terrible 1980s mainframe technology, signaling friction sounds like the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? I can just look at my slow, buggy app and tell my board, oh, it's not a poorly coded interface, it's actually signaling friction. We want the user to wait 30 seconds for the screen to load so they feel the institutional gravity of their transaction.
You're completely right, and it is a massive vulnerability in the framework. And it's exactly what security expert Bruce Schneier famously termed security theater. Security theater refers to countermeasures intended to provide a feeling of improved security while doing absolutely nothing to meaningfully reduce the probability of harm.
Taking your shoes off at the airport is the classic example, right?
Exactly. It makes us feel like something is being done, but its actual efficacy against a sophisticated threat is highly debatable.
So how do organizations prove they aren't just engaging in security theater? Because that seems like a huge gray area.
Sunstein proposes a mechanism for this, which he calls the sludge audit. It is a rigorous, data-driven evaluation where an organization must empirically prove that the friction actually performs the function they claim it does.
Okay, so show the work.
Yes. If a financial institution claims that a 72-hour hold on a specific type of transfer is vital for fraud prevention, they cannot just rely on intuition or vibes. They have to show the data. They have to prove exactly how many fraudulent transfers that specific hold actually catches.
And if they can't?
If they can't produce the data, it's not functional friction, it's just sludge masquerading as security, and it has to be redesigned or eliminated.
Okay, so let's transition from the theory of the sludge audit into a domain where this functional friction is quite literally a matter of financial life and death. Let's look at the adversarial landscape of digital security.
For this, we really rely heavily on Ross Anderson and his foundational textbook, Security Engineering. Anderson forces us to recognize a reality that product designers often completely ignore, which is that digital platforms do not operate in a vacuum. They operate in adversarial systems.
Meaning you aren't just designing a beautiful, frictionless interface for a well-intentioned customer who just wants to buy a sweater.
No.
You are simultaneously designing a fortress to repel malicious actors who are actively, creatively trying to break your logic, steal the customer's identity, and extract capital.
And Anderson frames this defense entirely through the lens of economics. In an adversarial system, the defender's goal is rarely to make an attack mathematically or physically impossible.
Because perfect security doesn't actually exist.
It doesn't.
And even if it did, the system would be so locked down it would be unusable for the real customer.
Exactly. Instead, the defender relies on the economics of friction. The goal is to simply raise the cost of the attack, whether that cost is measured in computing power, time, or human effort. You have to inject enough friction into the system that the attacker's expected return on investment becomes negative.
Friction is the toll booth that bankrupts the attacker.
That's a great way to put it. Think about credential stuffing. An attacker buys a list of 1 million leaked email and password combinations from some data breach on the dark web. If they can write a script that tests 10,000 combinations a second against a bank's login page, their cost per attack is literally fractions of a penny.
Right. But if the bank introduces friction, like a TPCHA or rate limiting that locks the IP address after 3 failed attempts, the economics completely flip.
The attacker has to slow down. They have to route through thousands of proxy servers. They have to pay for services to solve the capped TCHAs. The friction makes the attack unprofitable, so they move on to an easier target.
And we are not talking about theoretical risks here. The dossier provides terrifying data on the sheer scale of the adversarial landscape right now. Look at India's Unified Payments Interface, or UPI. It is arguably the most brilliant, frictionless, real-time retail payment system in the world.
It's incredible technology.
But that lack of friction is a massive double-edged sword. The government reported that over 805 crore rupees was lost to UPI frauds in just the first 8 months of the financial year. We're talking about over 1 million distinct incidents of fraud.
And looking at the United States, the Boston Fed provided data on something called synthetic identity fraud, which has now crossed the $35 billion mark. We mentioned this in the opening hook, but I think we really need to explain the mechanics of how this actually works.
Yeah, please do.
Because it is far more sophisticated than just stealing a credit card out of someone's mailbox. Synthetic identity fraud is often referred to as Frankenstein fraud.
Frankenstein fraud.
Yeah. The attacker doesn't steal an existing person's entire identity, because an adult usually has a credit file that algorithms monitor for sudden anomalies. Instead, they steal a single, pristine piece of data.
Like the toddler's social security number.
Exactly. Very often a child's SSN, because toddlers don't have credit histories and parents rarely check them, so they take the real social security number and they attach a fake name, a fabricated birth date, and a drop house address. They literally construct a ghost.
It is wild. And then what happens?
Then the long con begins. They use this synthetic identity to apply for a tiny high-interest microloan. They get approved, and here's the crucial part. They actually pay it back.
Oh, wow. So they behave like a perfect customer.
Completely perfect. They spend months, sometimes years, applying for small credit lines, paying them off, and slowly building a legitimate credit score for a person who does not exist.
That's insane.
The algorithms just see a highly reliable borrower. And once the credit limit is high enough, say $50,000 across multiple cards, they max everything out in a single weekend and completely vanish. The bank is left trying to collect a massive debt from a ghost.
And what makes this infinitely more dangerous today is generative AI.
Oh, yeah.
The Boston Fed report details how criminals are no longer doing this manually. They're using AI to automate the creation of these synthetic identities at a massive scale. AI can generate fake parental records. It can mimic the texting cadence of a confused teenager if a bank sends an inquiry. It can generate deepfake audio and video to bypass biometric KYC checks.
It's a nightmare for security teams.
Generative AI fundamentally lowers the cost of the attack, meaning the defender has to rely on structural friction more than ever before.
Which brings us to the core mathematical dilemma of security engineering, the authentication trade-off. Every single time a system asks for verification, it risks 2 specific types of errors, a false rejection or a false acceptance.
Let's define the mechanics of those errors for the listener. A false rejection happens when I, the legitimate account holder, try to log in from a new device, and the bank's algorithm gets suspicious.
Right.
It blocks me. It forces me to receive an OTP, answer security questions, maybe even call a helpline. I am the real user, but the system is rejecting my frictionless entry.
That is a false rejection, and it generates customer effort, which we know people hate. A false acceptance, on the other hand, is when a fraudster with stolen credentials logs in, the system weighs them right through without any friction, and they wire your life savings to a cryptocurrency exchange.
The costs of those 2 errors are wildly asymmetric.
Exactly.
If I suffer a false rejection, I lose 10 minutes of my afternoon and I'm irritated. If I suffer a false acceptance, my financial life is ruined.
Therefore, the friction that causes that occasional false rejection is not a failure of customer experience. It is a mathematical necessity of a secure system. The capacity to resist a transaction is actually part of the product. Let me say that again. A financial intermediary is valuable precisely because it knows when not to move money instantly.
That completely flips the paradigm. But if the math is so clear, what actually happens when an institution completely ignores this adversarial reality? What happens when a company gets so intoxicated by the gospel of frictionlessness that they optimize exclusively for speed at the expense of their protective systems?
Well, to understand the fallout of that, we really have to look through the lens of systems engineering. And for this, we turn to Donella Meadows and her seminal book, Thinking in Systems.
Meadows defines a system not just as a collection of parts, but as an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized to achieve a specific purpose.
Right. And one of the most profound dangers she identifies in management is the concept of sub-optimization.
Could you explain how sub-optimization actually breaks a system?
Sub-optimization occurs when a subsystem's goals are allowed to dominate at the expense of the total system's overall health.
Okay.
Meadows uses this really stark biological analogy. If a single cell in your body breaks free from its hierarchical cooperative function and just decides to optimize entirely for its own rampant growth and multiplication, completely ignoring the needs of the surrounding tissue.
They call that a cancer.
Exactly. It's a brutal analogy, but it maps perfectly to corporate structures. If a single department, say the marketing team or the onboarding team, optimizes only its own narrow metrics for speed and volume, it can act as a cancer that destroys the regulatory and structural integrity of the entire company.
And we have a massive, very contemporary case study of this exact phenomenon in the dossier. And that is the spectacular regulatory collapse of Paytm Payments Bank in India.
Let's set the stage for this because the scale is just staggering. Paytm was an absolute titan of the Indian fintech revolution. They had over 330 million digital wallet accounts. They were woven into the very fabric of daily commerce there, from street vendors to massive retailers.
They were the dominant force. But then the Reserve Bank of India, which is the central regulatory authority, stepped in and essentially dropped a nuclear bomb on their operations. The RBI ordered Paytm Payments Bank to completely stop accepting new deposits in their accounts or digital wallets.
It was a death sentence for their core business model. The market reaction was instantaneous. The stock plummeted roughly 35%, erasing over $2 billion in wealth in just a matter of days.
Unbelievable.
And when we analyze the mechanics of this failure through Meadows' systems lens, it is a textbook case of suboptimization caused by the reckless removal of functional friction.
Let's trace the failure path on this. The product and onboarding teams at Paytm had a very clear mandate: achieve massive, rapid, frictionless user growth. They wanted to capture market share faster than any legacy bank could. So they optimized their subsystem.
Right.
They made the app interface incredibly smooth. They reduced the number of clicks required to open an account to the absolute minimum.
But to achieve that level of effortlessness, they had to bypass structural friction. Specifically, they compromised on KYC, which stands for Know Your Customer.
Right.
KYC is the foundational regulatory friction of modern banking. It is the highly arduous process where an institution must definitively legally prove the identity of the person opening the account, primarily to prevent money laundering and terrorist financing.
It requires document verification, biometric checks, cross-referencing. It is heavy, annoying friction. And the RBI discovered that Paytm Payments Bank had allowed hundreds of thousands of accounts to be created without proper KYC compliance.
It's wild.
Some accounts were actually linked to the exact same identification documents. The onboarding team achieved their internal metric, which was explosive, frictionless growth. But by stripping away the compliance friction, they created an unmanageable regulatory vulnerability.
By optimizing the onboarding subsystem for zero friction, they literally destroyed the resilience and the legal standing of the entire institutional system.
The missing KYC friction wasn't just some bureaucratic hurdle they smartly removed to delight the user. It was a load-bearing wall.
Yes.
It was the structural foundation of their banking license. And when the regulator leaned on the building, the entire structure collapsed. They measured the benefit of the speed, but they entirely failed to value the protective function of the friction they deleted.
It is a devastating cautionary tale for any executive, but I want to pivot from the macro institutional level down to the micro level.
Okay.
We've seen how removing friction can cause systemic collapse, but how do you and I, as everyday consumers, judge the friction we encounter on our phones and laptops? How do we know if a barrier on a website is a load-bearing wall meant to protect us, or if it is a trap designed to exploit us?
That's a great question. And for this, the dossier provides an incredibly elegant conceptual tool, the asymmetry test.
The asymmetry test asks a fundamental question about power and intent. It asks, does the friction protect the customer's interest, or does the friction protect the institution's interest at the customer's expense?
Let's run some real-world examples through this test, starting with friction that actually protects the user. The dossier categorizes this as deliberative friction and defensive friction.
A prime example of deliberative friction is a feature introduced by Twitter, now X, which is the read before retweet prompt.
Oh, I encounter this all the time. If you see a headline that makes you angry and you immediately click the retweet button without actually clicking the link to read the article, a prompt pops up. It essentially says, hey, you haven't opened this link. Do you want to read it before you share it?
It is an intentional barrier. From a pure engagement metric standpoint, it is terrible for the platform.
Oh, definitely.
It slows down virality. It reduces the total number of actions a user takes. But functionally, its purpose is to interrupt impulsivity. It forces a cognitive pause, attempting to limit the reflexive spread of misinformation. It protects the integrity of the information ecosystem.
Another really powerful example is the concept of defensive friction, specifically in the context of gambling self-exclusion programs.
This is a great example.
Yeah. If someone recognizes they're struggling with gambling addiction, they can proactively place themselves on a statewide or platform-wide exclusion list. This legally bars them from entering a physical casino or logging into a sports betting app for a predetermined period, say 1 to 5 years.
And the key here is that this friction is largely irreversible. Even if the person experiences a moment of weakness the next day, drives to the casino, and literally begs security to let them in, the friction holds. They will be turned away.
That is massive friction. But it passes the asymmetry test perfectly, because the barrier exists entirely to protect the user from their own harmful impulses. The friction serves the customer's long-term interest over the institution's short-term profit.
Now, let's contrast that with what happens mechanically when a platform completely removes all deliberative friction in an environment where the stakes are incredibly high.
Okay.
The dossier highlights Robinhood as the canonical example of this failure.
Robinhood launched with a highly publicized mission to democratize finance, and their primary mechanism for doing so was the total eradication of friction.
Right.
They removed trading commissions, which eliminated a monetary friction. But far more dangerously, they removed almost all deliberative and informational friction from the trading interface.
They applied the design language of mobile gaming to highly complex financial markets. When a user executed a trade, digital confetti exploded on the screen. The interface was frictionless, colorful, and instantly rewarding.
And crucially, they made it incredibly easy for retail investors, regular people with absolute zero financial background, to gain access to options trading.
Which is terrifying.
Yes, options are highly complex, leveraged derivatives where you can lose significantly more money than you initially invested. Traditional brokerages have heavy informational friction, things like suitability checks, manual reviews, to ensure a client actually understands the math before they are allowed to trade options.
Robinhood completely bypassed that structural friction in the pursuit of seamless onboarding. By removing the deliberative barriers, they unleashed massive, impulsive retail trading behaviors. The lack of friction led directly to profound consumer harm, catastrophic individual losses, and ultimately massive regulatory fines.
Because the friction they removed was actually supposed to be a guardrail.
Exactly. Okay, so we have protective friction, but there is another category in the dossier that I found truly counterintuitive, and that is productive friction. This is the idea that sometimes the effort itself is what creates the value.
Right. Psychologists frequently refer to this dynamic as the IKEA effect.
Yes, I love this.
It's based on empirical studies demonstrating that consumers place a significantly higher subjective value on a piece of furniture they had to assemble themselves compared to an identical piece of furniture that was delivered completely pre-assembled.
Because you spent 2 hours interpreting those highly confusing diagrams and turning an Allen wrench, you infused the object with your own effort. The dossier references a study in psychology and marketing by Patagar and colleagues that charts this exact phenomenon. They differentiate between frustrating friction, where you exert effort but gain nothing, and rewarding friction, or constructive friction.
The clearest professional example of constructive friction is credentialing. Think about the bar exam for lawyers or the grueling residency requirements for medical doctors. The immense, agonizing friction of studying for those exams is not a bug in the system. The effort is the crucible that gives the credential its actual credibility.
Exactly. If they made the bar exam a frictionless, open-book online quiz that took 20 minutes, The credential would lose all its value instantly. The friction builds competence, and the friction signals that competence to the market.
So we have established the value of protective and productive friction. Now we have to apply the asymmetry test to the dark side. What happens when the friction is intentionally designed to exploit the user?
Then we enter the realm of dark patterns. The Federal Trade Commission has been waging a massive regulatory war against these practices recently, taking action against behemoths like Amazon and Publishers Clearinghouse.
The defining mechanical characteristic of a dark pattern is asymmetric friction.
Right.
A company will design a process so that an action benefiting the institution, like signing up for an auto-renewing subscription, is entirely frictionless. One click, no confirmation screen, and you're being billed monthly.
But the moment you attempt to cancel that subscription, suddenly you are trapped in a labyrinth of engineered sludge.
Oh, it's the worst.
You have to navigate through 6 nested menus. You have to click past multiple guilt-tripping screens saying, "Are you sure you want to lose all these amazing benefits?"
In some extreme cases, you can sign up on an app, but to cancel, you are literally forced to call a customer retention hotline during limited business hours and argue with a human being who is heavily incentivized not to let you leave.
That is exploitative friction. It does not protect the customer. It traps them. It weaponizes behavioral inertia, betting that the friction of canceling will outweigh the pain of the monthly charge. This is exactly why distinguishing between types of friction is the paramount managerial challenge today.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. If a company wants to navigate this correctly, if they recognize they can't just blindly delete all friction, but they also refuse to inflict dark patterns on their users, how should leadership actually make these decisions?
To synthesize the business strategy view, the dossier brings in some heavy hitters. We're talking Joan Magretta, Francis Frei, and Richard Rumelt. The central unifying lesson from all these strategists is that management is fundamentally about making difficult, unapologetic trade-offs.
Joan Magretta writes in, what management is drawing is that you cannot design an organization without acknowledging a really hard truth. Gaining coordination or efficiency in one specific area almost always means losing it in another. There is no magic panacea.
Exactly. And the core strategic danger they identify is the trap of optimizing for operational efficiency, making things faster and smoother without first understanding what the customer is actually buying from you.
Let's apply that to our banking scenario from earlier.
Okay, so if a customer is using a bank, what are they fundamentally purchasing? They are not buying a software interface. They are buying security, trust, and the ironclad guarantee that their money will be there tomorrow morning.
Right.
If the bank strips away authentication friction in a misguided attempt to make the app effortless, they might improve their customer effort score this quarter, but they are actively degrading the core product they are actually selling. They are trading away systemic security for superficial convenience without acknowledging the catastrophic cost of that trade.
Okay, I track the logic perfectly, but I have to throw a massive technological counter-argument at you. A counter-argument that could potentially render this entire debate about friction totally obsolete in the next 5 years.
Okay, I'm listening.
We have been talking about physical signatures, OTP codes, rate limits, key TCHAs. Isn't this all just a temporary artifact of clumsy technology? With the rapid advancement of AI-powered risk assessment, continuous behavioral biometrics, device intelligence, won't we just move entirely to a world of adaptive friction?
Walk me through how you envision adaptive friction operating in practice.
Well, it's already happening in some places. The system doesn't need to ask me for a password because the system just knows it's me. The app is continuously tracking the exact gyroscope angle at which I hold my phone, the unique cadence of my typing speed, the geolocation of my home Wi-Fi network.
Right.
If all those passive signals match my historical behavior perfectly, the AI grants me zero friction. I just tap and pay instantly. But if a fraudster in another country buys my session token and tries to initiate a transfer, the AI easily flags the behavioral anomalies and hits them with a brick wall of step-up authentication. Doesn't this technology completely dissolve the binary trade-off between friction and effortlessness?
It is an incredibly powerful argument, and you are right that adaptive invisible friction is the direction every major financial institution is sprinting toward right now.
Yeah.
However, the dossier suggests that this technology does not solve the institutional puzzle. It actually elevates it.
How does it elevate it? If the good guys get no friction and the bad guys get all the friction, isn't the problem basically solved?
Because the friction doesn't disappear. It just becomes invisible, conditional, and algorithmic. which transforms it from a UX design issue into a massive, highly sensitive governance issue.
Oh, who watches the watchers, basically?
Precisely. Who inside the organization decides the risk thresholds for the AI? What is the acceptable statistical rate of false positives? And most importantly, what are the distributional consequences when the algorithm inevitably makes a mistake?
Ah, I see the danger.
Hmm.
Let's say an AI algorithm is trained to spot anomalies, and a vulnerable customer, maybe someone who works unpredictable shift hours, who just bought a cheap secondhand phone, and who happens to be logging into their bank account from a public library IP address.
They trigger every alarm.
Right, they trigger the fraud models,
Yeah.
the AI incorrectly flags them and locks them out of their only bank account, with absolutely zero human intervention.
And because the friction is driven by a black box machine learning model, that customer might have absolutely no way to appeal the decision or even understand why they are being blocked.
That's a huge problem.
The shift toward invisible conditional friction does not mean we can stop thinking about the physics of friction. It means we require even better conceptual frameworks for decision making. We have to be explicitly legally clear about who gets friction, when they get it, and under whose algorithmic judgment.
So to bring this entire investigation back to the surface, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've gone from Joshi the giraffe to synthetic AI fraud, from metric fixation to systems collapse, from the IKEA effect to dark patterns. What is the ultimate takeaway for the listener trying to navigate this landscape?
The ultimate takeaway is not that organizations should stop trying to reduce customer effort. Sludge is still terrible, bureaucratic waste is still waste, and bad user experience is still just bad user experience.
Right.
The crucial takeaway is that institutions must stop treating all friction as identical.
Because we are operating in a world of imperfect measurement. We can easily, precisely count the abandoned shopping carts, but we cannot easily count the catastrophic fraud that was deterred by a simple text message code.
And because of that structural measurement asymmetry, the true challenge of modern management is no longer just the elimination of obstacles. It is classification. It is having the strategic wisdom to know exactly when friction is part of the product, when it is an essential layer of protection, and when it is merely a burden.
And that brings us perfectly back to where we started. The next time you find yourself deeply frustrated by an obstacle on a digital platform, or sitting in a chair at a physical institution waiting for a manager to countersign a form, yes, pause for just a second before you curse the UX designer or the bank teller. Ask yourself, who is this friction actually protecting? Because in a world where speed is increasingly weaponized by bad actors, the very thing slowing you down might be the only thing keeping you safe.
That is the essential reframing we all need.
That's our deep dive for today. Keep questioning the systems around you, look for the load-bearing walls, and we'll see you next time.